Services has been facing in its quest to raise revenue during this period? Have we seen a sharp rise, a sharp fall? What has happened to the whole tax administration environment, particularly in the last 1.5 years? Mr. Zubair, if you can start from you.
Good afternoon, my moderator and the listening audience. Well, the pandemic hit us very hard early part of last year, and of course it's had some initial devastating effect on the economy, and anything that affects the economy definitely will affect the fortunes of the Lagos Internal Revenue Service. But we have been able to put in a lot of initiatives to try and minimize the effect of the pandemic, and overall, I would say that the LRS has fared quite well, despite all the constraints and challenges. Now, I believe you want me to talk around the challenges that we have faced as an agency, as opposed to how well, because if we talk about how well the agency has done, I'm pleased to tell you that we recorded a 102% performance in 2020, which I'll modestly say, I'll humbly say that it wasn't too bad for us. But we must also take into account that the initial budget was revised, just like all budgets for the Federation, and were also revised. But in terms of the challenges, a lot of the challenges remain. And I can't say that these challenges have been occasioned by COVID. The challenges have been there, and they remain. They're just a bit more reinforced. So to talk around our challenges generally, the first one being the apathy towards paying taxes. All over the world, nobody wants to pay taxes. But especially in Nigeria, it's a challenge, even convincing a lot of people to pay their taxes. So the apathy is one side of things. The other side of things is access to data. All the time, you cannot talk about development without talking about data all the time. You cannot talk of generating revenue without looking at the data. Nigeria itself has a challenge with data. We have a big challenge getting credible data. How do we profile taxpayers? That is our greatest concern. So we constantly have to bring a lot of initiatives in to be able to overcome that challenge. There are many other challenges, infrastructural challenges. Bandwidth, internet is a problem. If we're going digital, leveraging on technology, it's very important that we have that atmosphere where a lot of members of the public have access to internet. Then there's also another problem, which is that of the trust deficit between residents and government, which is where you also talked about the chicken and egg situation. Who is going to bulge first? Is it government who is going to, bring in developmental projects? And then people pay their taxes when they realize that their taxes are being diverted towards development? Or is it the people who will, follow what the social contract says, pay their taxes, and then see development? Because development is all about domestic resource mobilization. The government must get its funding from somewhere. And all over the world, you see there's a high correlation between payment of taxes and development. There are a few other challenges that we are constantly trying to overcome through the use of technology. But these are the more significant ones. Maybe I can also talk about our tax laws. Our tax laws are a bit archaic. It's a very welcome development that the government has started releasing a Finance Act on an annual basis. So there is a review of some of the laws. But there are also a lot of other laws. For instance, we're having a filing, we're in a filing season right now. If people don't file, what's the penalty? The penalty is very, very low and ancient. It has to be reviewed. Also, there's the issue of enforcement. We have a major challenge of enforcement. So a lot has to be done also by government, maybe setting up more revenue courts so that the issue of adjudication can go on smoothly, because there will always be disputes. There will always be taxpayers challenging the assessments that they have received. So if there is no proper means by which reconciliation can be done, or an arbitrator can step in, then there's a problem. So these are the general challenges that I can talk about now.
Thank you so very much. I think that's quite broad, and I like the fact that you spoke across a very wide spectrum of issues, and I think you've also, in a very nice way, lay out some of the follow-on questions I was going to be taking on the rest of my panel member, and I'll be alternating between the panel member that are in-house here and Mr. Bismarck and Odun that are online. So maybe I will go with Odun first, and then I'll come back to Mr. Bismarck, because some of the points that Mr. Zubair did mention in terms of the challenges. So he mentioned some that I will want Bismarck to help me deal with once Odun is done. He mentioned issues around the apathy and the culture, the trust deficit issue, and so I will want Bismarck to talk to this one a lot later, but I'll come back to you. But the other side to it is the whole conversation around digitization and automation and technology, which was probably the only way that Lagos State could have been able to make generate the amount that was generated during the pandemic period. So, Odun, I want you to help us situate where the state is in terms of the level of automation and the level of digitization, and how the headroom that still exists in terms of where we should be. So what's your own current assessment in terms of how well the state has done in leveraging technology, in digitizing the process, and what difference could this have made if we have been better, or have we done enough that we can do in this space? Odun?
Right. Thank you so much. So I think that we've had some progress. Right. I like the fact that we can now go online and pay our taxes when due, that people can retrieve their TIN numbers from the internet and all of that. But I will say that a lot of those improvements came in the last year or two. Right. We've been running, for the most part, the Nigerian tech ecosystem has started since around 2000. This wave started since 2013. And while the improvements that we currently have are great, I think that there's still a ways to go in automating those taxes. In the calculation of it, in the payment of it, there's still processes among it that are still largely manual, and it will help if people can do those things automatically. Registering new staff members who join the company, paying for them, upgrading, and I suppose I don't think that you can fully lay the responsibility for this on the LIRS or the FIRS per se, because it speaks to a larger problem of data collection in Nigeria, right? We don't have a proper identity system yet, and so it makes every process that relies on the identification of any one person a bit more cumbersome than it should be. So for instance, if you have all of our information, like your address, phone number, salary, and all these other bank accounts and everything tied to a central data processing system, then it'd be easy for us to track and pay taxes as at when do you get automated reminders. I think that, for instance, in the US, everyone knows that a specific period is tax period. That knowledge is still not very generic knowledge in Nigeria, as it were. There's so many gaps, knowledge gaps there that still need to be closed. And in as much as we do have an identity problem, I still think that there's a lot that tech can do between now and when the gap is closed. So I'll say we're doing very well. I think it's much better than where it was in 2013, 2014. and there's certainly ways for improvement. I think it will be a lot different in, say, 2022. But as I said before, there's always room for improvement, and there's always room for consolidation of that data.
Awesome. All right. Thanks so much. I like the acknowledgement of the fact that some measure of progress is being made, but critical point that you raised that struck me is in terms of the knowledge gap, the communication, and I think I'll come back to that in a different round. So I wouldn't know whether Mr. Zubar did agree with the level of sensitization, but I'll come back to that question when I move around. Mr. Ruwani, if you hold on a minute, I'm going to ask Mr. Adeniyi, because I really want your response to cover some of the points that Mr. Zubar has said, but I want to hear from the organized private sector what Mr. Adeniyi's perspective will be. So when we look at the whole climate for tax administration, how ideal for business survival and business growth, how enhancing, how enabling is the whole environment from a private sector perspective? So will you say, particularly in Lagos, and we're looking at Lagos State in particular, so will you say, as a taxpayer, as someone running businesses, the system of tax administration is ideal, or what will make for a rational tax admin system for you that will enable the business to focus on their core area, but also be able to pay its fair share to the development of the states?
Yeah, thank you, Benro. And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I also want to say a big thank you for the opportunity of this platform. Well, the truth be told, while resources are scarce, needs are not going to stop piling. It's going to continue to increase. Unfortunately, resources are going to continue to be scarce. Whether we have pandemic or not, there's not going to be a time when we're going to have been able to meet all of the needs with the resources that we have. Having said that, it's also gladdening to note that Mr. Subel alluded to the fact that 102% revenue was generated. And yes, I'm sure if statistics will not fail us, it's probably going to tell us that between 70 and 80% of that probably came from private sector. And here we are as private sector business operators, we still suffer the front of so many issues around multiple taxation. You have, well, again, maybe looking away from the fact that if you look at those that are lightly charged by government, when you say government now, yes, you can put a figure to it, you can put a percentage to it, but when you now have government as it comes down to the local government, then you have a lot of challenges. And you're wondering, the government at the center, are they so incapacitated that they cannot come to the aid of businesses where all of these things can't be rationalized? You do not want a case where somebody then wakes up, you drive your car and you move from Ojodu local government to Ikeja local government, and somebody is telling you, you do not even have a boundary. They tell you, because you have crossed to this other end of the city, it's a different ball game. Can't we have published what is expected of businesses to pay? You see, organized private sector have gone beyond the issue of whether we want to pay tax or we don't want to pay tax. We are ready to pay tax. But what we're saying is that let us know what that tax figure is. Let it be published so that every business knows that once I pay this, I have paid. And then also the issue of your agencies now coming to harass the agency, a different agency will come in the morning, is another one in the evening, if you are still there, to tell you that, and you have all kinds of stickers all around the place. Can we put all of this together so that probably that figure will go from 102 to 110 to 120 to 150, as the case may be, if we have these things rationalized. I'll stop there for other comments.
Thank you so much. I think there's a lot of rebound that will happen. I want to know what Mr. Zubair's perspective is in terms of this whole question around the number or the multiplicity of taxes and whether there is no certainty. But I'll take Mr. Ruwani first. So the question I want Mr. Ruwani to help me attend to, if Mr. Ruwani can hear me, is...
I can hear you.
Awesome. So the whole balance that we need to strike and this whole conversation around the culture of taxation, the trust deficit, and balancing that with taxation with human face. So what is the real crux of the problem here? All right. So the taxing public or the public, you will often hear questions around what is the morality of government asking for more to be paid when we don't even have evidence that that which we have paid is judiciously utilized, and is that is that an appropriate excuse to be non-compliant with taxes? So it's a chicken and egg thing. Government needs the revenue to be able to fund the same infrastructure and make development happen. So how do we balance this, and how can government actually be a lot more humane in its approach to taxation? Just help us dimension that, Mr. Ruwani.
Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored to be here. First and foremost, before we go into the morality of taxation, we need to situate taxation in its context as a tool for management and a tool for development. So typically, in the times of a recession or any time of economic slowdown, you actually give away taxes, and you slow down the taxes so that it can be used to actually jumpstart the economy. But when there's time of growth and otherwise, then you actually do things properly. Now, so let us take the normal situation where what you are talking about is the value for money. If people have doubts as to whether the money they are paid is being used in a valuable manner, then they will resist this. So I think that is the first thing. Secondly, is the fact that how is it, there's multiple tax jurisdictions, there's personal income tax, corporate income taxes. And so the question from an economic standpoint is, where is the burden of tax and where is the incidence of tax? The incidence of tax is where the tax hits first. For example, if I paid an excise duty, the incidence is on me, the company, but the burden is on the consumer. So you have to understand that the difference between the incidence of tax and the burden of tax. So I think that is the reality. So if I'm able to pass on the tax burden to somebody else, then I can shift that burden and then it can be transferred. But if I'm not able to shift that burden and I have to bear it, then I will have to pass it on in terms of cost, and I say it will actually encourage a demobilization of staff and so on. So I think we have to look at it. One, the value for money. Two, how is it being used? Three, is there accountability and transparency so that people don't have any false ideas that the money is being stolen and it's a leakage from the system? Then finally, is it being used as a tool for economic management? So in other words, when there's a recession or when there's a big slowdown, you reduce taxes, and then when there is growth and a boom, you actually can increase tax. But the whole idea is not to increase the rate of taxation, but to increase the mobilization of taxes so that the revenue is collected in a large scale. Because it's the volume that matters. It is not the actual penal rate of taxation, which is the key thing. So when I think that is what we need to understand. And I'm happy that Mr. Zubair addressed this, and that the state government is also listening to those four canons of taxation, which is one, it must raise revenue, it must be easy to administer, it must be neutral, and it must be fair and equitable. Those are the things that I need to talk about.
Awesome, awesome. Thanks so much, Mr. Ruwani. I'm going to move to Funmi now. So my question is going to you. So you are in advisory business. You are a consultant. So I will expect you to be like the go-between. So maybe like the neutral arbiter here. And the question, the issue I wanted to address is around how the state can actually grow its revenue and widen its tax base. Already there is a conversation around the multiplicity of taxes and maybe the present burden that taxpayers do pay. I've had questions being raised around, and Mr. Denny alluded to that some minutes ago, around certainty about the number of taxes to be paid. So I don't know whether you're indeed familiar with some specifics of type of taxes or levies that are being paid that are not part of the approved levies and taxes. So is the whole question around the number of levies and taxes being too many, or is the question around there are some hidden taxes or hidden levies that some local government authorities or some states are charging that we're not aware of? So which is, and what can the state do to actually sustainably and responsibly grow its taxes?
Thank you very much for that question, but you know, I'll take a back seat to explain certain things. So I know that taxation is important, but at the same time it's a social contract. So I give and you give back to me. And the development of any nation is dependent on the revenue that it generates from taxes. So as much as possible, whatever we have received, the revenue collected, what is the government using it for? I have a lot of clients that have complained about the usage of these taxes because they see flamboyant cars, or vehicles, houses owned by government officials. And most times, like NECA also alluded to it, that most of the taxes, like the 101% generated, will probably be from private sector. So one thing we know is there's multiplicity of taxes in Lagos and even in Nigeria, and local governments would come, harass companies, harass shops, harass business owners, and the state government would also come. Federal government is also there knocking at your door. So there is actually a need for the government officials, and I know there's JTB synchronization with state internal revenue services and federal internal revenue services. But where we have different officials coming to you, you're confused, although you want to be compliant, but you're not sure what level of compliance we're talking about. Who am I attending to? This person is asking me for the same type of levy, the same type of fee, the same type of tax at the same time. And this is one company that generates revenue from one source, or, they just have one book. So most times we always advocate that the state government actually concentrate on other sectors, including the informal sector. What are they doing? How are they generating the revenue? Sometimes the state government, because I know apart from Lagos State that is doing so well, because I used to be part of the public sector, I know other states are actually afraid to discuss with their informal sector because they are afraid of a rally, or they are afraid of riots, or they are afraid of what will come during election. So they actually would not want to confront the people that can generate much more. So they concentrate on the formal sector. So would advise that informal sector should be concentrated on. State government should be deliberate about it. There used to be a stakeholders conference to bring together all informal sectors, discuss with them how to generate. It could be as little as 5,000 per year, and that would add to the purse of the government. So you shouldn't create more burden on the people that are compliant. And one thing that sticks out for the private sector is, despite the COVID and the dwindling oil prices, a lot of them are still trying as much as possible to keep their employees. Some downsize yet, but I'm happy that Lagos State actually gave some incentive, which was deliberate, and it was good because so many of my clients benefited from this, including the extension of the filing deadline. It's good, but at the same time, we need you to please concentrate on those other sectors that are not doing so much. The vocational workers, people that are on the street hawking, they can pay as little as you can imagine, but we also need the state government and the federal government to be able to give back to the society society. A lot of people are unemployed. What are they doing about those people? Because we're harassed on the street. You know, there are so many hoodlums on the road. They're beggars. They're destitute. So what is the state government doing about that? So there's security of lives and properties. So that way we are rest assured that our taxes are going to the right source, and we're not seeing someone living above and beyond their means.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Fumi. I'm going to go back to Mr. Subara now. A lot of questions on the table, and I think the area I want you to start is to just help me put closure on this conversation around the multiplicity of taxes. So in Lagos, with your role as the executive chairman of the Internal Revenue Services here, is there a specific reference guide, for example, in the state where businesses and taxpayers could say, this is the compendium of the charges and the levies that are applicable at the state and at the local government level, or are this claims totally unfounded, or is it the same, or is it information gap or communication gap? Because we did heard one of our panel members mentioning the gap in the communication. So is a lack of knowledge in terms of the number of levies or the type of taxes that should be paid, or is this claim legitimate, or is there a reference guide somewhere where we can have a compendium of the charges that are applicable in the states?
Thank you, Mr. Olugbenro, for that question. Well, my approach would be to first remind all of us that we operate a federal system, federal, state, and local governments. They're all separate tiers of government, and there's a limit to how much you might want to dictate to either of the three tiers of government. As far as the state is concerned, Lagos Internal Revenue Service, the taxes that we administer are all certain. They're certain, they're fixed, which namely for personal income taxes, you have the payee and direct assessment, you have withholding taxes, you have capital gains tax, you have stamp duties, and of course, you have consumption tax. So these are certain, the rates are certain, the collection, the rules around collection are very certain. So we don't really have a lot of complaints because you cannot talk about double taxation. Nobody is going to charge you on the same transaction twice. But with the approved taxes and levies, there's also a misconception on the part of members of the public. Members of the public do not distinguish between taxes, levies, and administrative charges. To members of the public, everything is tax. So a definition of tax is it's a compulsory payment for which residents or taxpayers are not supposed to expect a direct benefit from. So these administrative charges and levies usually are charged for the provision of certain services. For instance, LOMA might introduce an administrative charge. You are paying LOMA because LOMA will come and clear your refuse at the end of the day. So there's nothing wrong with the levies and charges. The only place you can have a little bit of problem is where two local governments charge exactly the same type of levy. And as much as possible, being a responsible government, our dynamic governor, Mr. Sanwo-Olu, is thinking a lot about how we can minimize the issue of multiplicity of taxes, if indeed it exists. One of the steps that Mr. Governor has taken is to inaugurate the Joint State Revenue Committee. So this committee, recently inaugurated, is charged with harmonization of taxes. And one of the objectives that we intend to carry out will be a codification of the taxes, or to create a sort of compendium whereby all the taxes for the states and charges and levies for the local governments as enshrined in the Approved Tax and Levies Act will be coded. So any businessman who wants to set up a business at the beginning of the year or whatever can look through this code and he knows all the types of levies and administrative charges that he's going to face during the next financial year or fiscal year. So that would be a major step. The other step, of course, has to do with enlightening and educating members of the public. And without wanting to tell people to resist, I would advise Lagosians or residents of Lagos to avail themselves with all the knowledge around taxes so that they can determine which taxes or which levies are enshrined statutorily or otherwise.
Awesome, awesome. So some strong words of advice there. So if it's coming from the chairman of IRS, you had better take it very seriously. So it's not all of the time that someone puts some bit of barbed wire in front of your car that you fall for the pressure. So you need to understand what taxes and what levies are applicable. So knowledge is critical. Knowledge is power. Mr. Denny, let me come to you. You did hear the comment by Mr. Zubar around what the state is doing to harmonize the taxes and have a joint state revenue committee to be able to probably produce a compendium or a list. I think that will, in a way, address one of the issues that you did raise. So are there other aspects of the tax administration system that you rather want to put at the center to say, look, let the state governor or the state government help us address this one also by the same breath? All right, so what will those be within the whole process of tax administration? What other specific pinpoint do we have and we want to put at the center to say, look, if Lagos State will help us deal with this the same way that they're trying to harmonize, we will, you mentioned that, I mean, businesses are ready to pay taxes. So it's about making the process simple, easy, and less burdensome. So what would be those specific asks from a private sector perspective?
Thank you very much. Again, I want to thank Mr. Subero for the good work that has been done. To be honest, work is ongoing. Just that for us, we want to see more. I'm going to quickly list a few points that Yomi will permit me to. And it has to do with the tax administration itself. I think it was Odoayo that talked about the issue of technology and how far Lagos State has come with ensuring that technology supports what we do in terms of tax payment. But I tell you, if there's anything that needs urgent attention, is that platform. Because even when companies are willing or ready to pay tax, you get frustrated with the platform. For whatever reason, it's not customer-centric. It's so cumbersome, and then sometimes you just cannot access the platform. So this is one area we need government, so that, you see, the resources available, like I did said at the beginning, is not as much as the need. I mean, to meet, it's not going to be able to meet the need that we have. So if, for instance, I'm willing to pay today or to upload my tax figure, and then I get frustrated, what will be tied if by tomorrow you have some other immediate needs? Because the need will always be there. You then find out that, oh, you look at it and say, okay, if I still have a few number of days, and then you go on, and you postpone the payment. That's one. Two, we need people who will begin to look at the large corporates and have dedicated desks that attend to their issues. It's like you have your A customers. If I have my A customers, I'm not going to treat them like my C customers. I have people who go after them and ensure that within the ambient of the law, their needs are attended to. That way, you endear them to wanting to do more. But in a case where you have both those who do that, I mean, the large corporate mixed up with the individual, and then everybody is grabbing for the same attention, it doesn't work. Again, we also will be asking for, you know, I take, for instance, Obarakran Avenue. This is an industrial hub in Lagos State. Everybody knows. Now, the organized private sector is saying that on that road, for instance, you do not have a single government agency or whatever. But you have the roads, you have street lights, you have that particular road. Now, what we are saying is that for such industrial hubs, where you know that you generate such income, particular attention should be paid to such environment, such that their roads are in good shape. That's all we're asking for. Such that the street light, everything is laid out, so that when I drive past that road, for instance, and I see that yes, this could not have been possible if somebody is not working at it, then I'm encouraged to do what is expected of me to do, such that that can continue. I'll stop there so that we can also still. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Deniyi. So I'm going to go online to Mr. Ruwani, and the angle I would want you to help us x-ray is data and intelligence, you know, in the whole, the difference that this make in the whole process of widening the tax net, deepening tax penetration. I know that you were involved at some point just some few years back, Project Lighthouse, where, you know, we're trying to you know, unify the data and get unique identifier for everybody and amalgamate different pockets of databases and all of that. So to what extent do you think the state is leveraging data and intelligence, and how analog, for the choice of, for the lack of better word, is the state? I know that as an example to many other states in the Federation, we will put Lagos State at the forefront. But in terms of, you know, the destination, you know, how close are we and how well are we using data and intelligence, and what can the state actually do with respect to this in ensuring that this sustainability question around revenue generation question is answered positively?
Yeah, it's a very important question, and I think Lagos State is at the forefront, but being at the forefront, at the cutting edge of technology for you as a tool for mobilizing and collecting taxes in Africa and in Nigeria in particular does not put you at the forefront globally. So to a large extent, you can see that Lagos State has done some work, but it's so far, far behind when you look at other tax jurisdictions across even Africa and in the world. So there's a lot of work to be done. And it's not just on taxes alone, but it's all other terms of revenue, like toll gate collection, tariffs, motor vehicle licensing, and so on and so forth. I think the first point is that what's the data? What's the population data and estimation, one? Two, how do you mobilize them? And how do you identify them so that they can stop avoiding taxation rather than evading taxation? The point was made by Subir that, or somebody else who said that if there are competing needs and you have one and there's a problem in trying to log on, and then I will meet that competing need, and then by the time I put this tax obligation at the back of the hierarchy of needs, and that becomes a dangerous situation. It is true that the more you mobilize, the better the development of the state. And there should be some compensation. There should be some compensation for compliance. And I think that is extremely important as far as I'm concerned. So one is to invest in the technology. Two, to implement it, to ensure that it is done properly. And it's not just for personal income tax purposes, but also for other revenue sources that are there. I think that is extremely important in terms of doing that, knowing very well that all taxes collected will reduce the amount of money that the government is going to put, all right? I mean, it increases the revenue that the government has and its ability to deliver social and physical infrastructure to the people. I think that's important. And by so doing, the debt service, which is a burden to this government and Lagos State in particular, will be reduced because the revenues that are brought in will be used to amortize the debt and reduce the debt service burden. I think that's important. And don't forget, the state also has international cross-border obligations. That is a debt in other currencies, which means that if the exchange rate moves, like it has moved recently, the amount of debt actually increases significantly, even without doing anything. So that is why it's important, one, the revenue collection system has to be efficient, and it has to be timely, and it has to be revenue generating. That way it will reduce the burden of the revenue burden of the government and its ability to deliver to the people, which is at the end of the day, which is the key thing that people want in the social contract between the governed and the governing.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bismarck. So I will expect that some of our live virtual audience will probably have a few questions they're putting on the platform. So we'll check up on the Q&A box. So if you do have questions for any of my panel members, so please put it across. We'll pick a few of those and be able to pass the questions around so we can have a lot more engagement during this panel. Odunayo, let me come to you, and I want your perspective still on that issue of data and intelligence and automation. Or data and intelligence, doing some bit of stratification and seeing how the state can be a lot more effective in widening the net. If you look at the current statistics of the revenue structure for Lagos State, you're still going to have the vast majority of it being dominated by those in paid employment whose employers have to comply with the PAY scheme, and all of that. So the informal sector are still a bit of a challenge. So are there specific ways that technology can help us crack, this code and be able to spread the burden a lot more by having more people within the net? So what will be your perspective on that subject, Odunayo?
Well, I think that one of the best ways to capture the audience that you would need to capture, especially in the informal sector, would be to work hand in hand with existing companies that serve those markets, right? Automation in and of itself is something that several startups within the tech ecosystem already cover, right? Between, for instance, now if you talk about agency banking, there is quite a number of startups that already serve the market that is not using formal banks. Right, you have Paga, you have Kudi, and you have several others, right? A way to bring those people into the fold, a way to recognize them would be by working with the stakeholders. And I think that speaks to the larger, larger picture of when it comes to regulation, whether tax or otherwise, and tech companies. Right, the way to move forward isn't by making all of these rules or by setting tax expectations in exclusion of the people who you expect to pay. You have to be able to bring all of the stakeholders to the table, right? How can we make this better? If you're going to employ technology, if you're going to do anything, you speak to the people who are expert at it. Some of us have spent the past 7, 8, 10 years purely working on products that are minimizing human interaction when it comes to certain services. That's kind of what you want to see when it comes to taxes. You want to automate. You want the knowledge to be automatically there. You want to be able to gather data. You want people to be able to come to a platform and make it a one-stop shop for their tax and regulatory services. You cannot do that without speaking to the people who currently work in that field to capture the informal market or to begin to capture the informal market. Paga has 16 million people registered on that platform. Those people, I think maybe at least 60% of them don't have bank accounts, right? Speaking to those people is how you begin to capture them and begin to, first of all, do the process of educating them about the paying of their taxes. There is a knowledge gap, there is an education gap, there is an understanding gap. And we can only close that gap by working with the stakeholders that are involved. A lot of people have spent time speaking to like the millennial market and all of those market brackets that people feel are not like paying taxes, but a lot of times they're not paying because they don't understand it, or they don't know why they should pay, or they don't know how to pay, right? So working together instead of like it being an exclusionary or an antagonistic like arrangement might be the best way forward to be able to close that gap and also improve upon the existing technologies.
Right. Thanks so much for that insight. So for me, let me come to you, and I just need you to help me take a little bit of a look around the regulation, around the law. Mr. Zubair did mention, the fact that we enjoying in the last 2 years amendment to our tax law by the Instrumentality of Finance Act, but how much more work do we need in this area? So, because beyond the administration, one of the critical pillars to being able to raise revenue is what the law, what the regulatory environment is like. So, is the current provision or the current regulatory landscape, is it ideal enough? Are there some specific impediments? Are there ways that it is just changing the state? Are there ways that it is, impeding on businesses and taxpayers? So what's your perspective on this for me?
Okay, thank you so much. Maybe before I answer that question, I just wanted to put some perspective to the question Mr. Adeni actually asked concerning filing of returns. I mean, the chairman is here, but I'm talking from the perspective of consultant, and I have dealings with other states' internal revenue, and I can put a comparison to the activities. So, for example, before the tax filing deadline, in fact, last year, the tax authority deliberately invited consultants and companies to a session just to educate them on how the filings will be. And there were a lot of questions around, how do I log in? What if I get itches trying to file my returns? And I'm sure they adequately responded to the question. So that was why it was pretty much easy for us to file the returns. Other states, I mean, if we compare, then I can tell you that Lagos State is 100% ahead of other states. And perhaps there are rooms for improvement, or maybe a lot of education needs to go into this, but I just wanted to respond to that, just for the viewers to know. So for the question you asked, honestly, the Finance Act, Yomi, a lot of us were there to, during the Senate hearing and also the House of Rep hearing on the issues we noted within the Finance Act, both the 2019 and the 2020 Finance Act. And some changes were made, but a lot of them were not revised based on the clamor for change and all that. So I will tell you that there are still gaps, there are gaps, and it's very important that, and I'm happy that they said this will be done annually, and we hope that this would eventually be changed, because, for example, what actually applies to personal income tax is the take-home, the taxpayer's net pay has actually gone up, by removing, they claim that the gross income, the relief shouldn't be added to the gross income. Therefore, you would have to deduct it before you calculate the consolidated relief allowance, and that actually brings up the taxes, and then the net pay actually goes lower. So those are some gaps. But one thing I also want to mention is, when every Lagosian pays the right thing, where there's equity, people would actually want to be compliant. If I see that my neighbor is paying as much as I'm paying, then I'll be confident that there's no partiality anywhere. And also, I also would advise the tax authority and also the lawmakers to activate the proper taxation of benefits in kind. There are loopholes around that. We're not sure there's no clear cut to it. So there are still gaps that it can fill, and would advise that government should actually control the government resources as well as improve the taxes. We are trying to pay our taxes, but we know the GDP ratio is low when it comes to tax to GDP ratio, but we know that when there's proper education and enlightenment, there would be more compliance from the taxpayers. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Funmi. Thanks so much, Funmi. So, Mr. Zubair, I want to come back to you. And I know that one of the things very close to your chest and which you have been pursuing over the last number of years is, the whole web platform, online platform, to make the process of tax administration much easier. So, your e-tax platform. Talk to us about where we are in terms of that. How widely, what's the level of acceptance by the taxpayer? Are there some specific experiences you've had where taxpayers are not willing to probably migrate to the e-portal platform? Are there reasons they are providing and all of that? So just share some perspective to us on where the state is in terms of the e-tax system.
Thank you very much, Yomi. The e-tax platform is an end-to-end tax administration solution that we came up with to try and ease the cost of compliance to taxpayers, to make it easy, to create a platform that is very accessible and is able to take care of all the taxation needs of the residents of Lagos. And so far, it's been a very good experience. If I may just throw a little light on what Mr. Denny had said earlier on, the e-tax platform is very, very easy to get onto. It is online 24/7, and anybody who wants to access the e-tax, we have not really recorded any downtime when it comes to the e-tax platform. It's a very, very seamless platform. And we also have support services around the platform. For instance, we have a contact center that works. Well, it works during office hours for now. It doesn't work 24/7. But embedded in the e-tax solution is a chat. So to the bottom right corner of anybody's screen, there's always a pop-up. And with the chat, you're able to chat real-time with members of the contact center. Also, we make sure that even where the chat cannot be real-time, i.e. if the person who picks the line is a bit, doesn't have all the full knowledge, if it's a complex tax question, for instance, we take the information and we will always go back to the taxpayer and ensure that we satisfy all those questions. To also go back a little bit, he talked about some element of creating desk for maybe large
taxpayers.
Yes, the LRS has long taken care of this sort of issue. We have a segmentation, taxpayer segmentation. So for the large corporates, for instance, we have a relationship management unit who liaise with all the taxpayers, all the corporate taxpayers that are within that region. We also have what we call the high net worth individuals, which is also another type of segmentation for individuals. And then we also have the informal sector that is also segmented. For the informal sector, because there's been a lot of talk around the informal sector, bringing them into the tax net, we're working very hard. It's a very difficult sector to deal with for so many reasons. Black economy, cash, they're highly mobile, they have poor record keeping, and so many other issues around the informal sector. But we've created an initiative now which we call the Ibile Hub. And with that initiative, we've realized that we really have to understand fully how they operate. So to assist with that, we have a solution, like I said, the Ibile Hub solution, which helps with registration. It helps generate an assessment almost immediately. Receipts are also printed almost immediately. And we have a lot of operatives who go into the markets. So we have a lot of collaboration with the market leaders, the geologists, biologists. We have a lot of collaboration with the trade unions and the trade associations, rather, not the unions. So the whole idea is to close that knowledge gap. Let them know what taxation is about. Let them know all the obligations that they have to society, to creating a civil society and all the likes. And it's been working very well. And to go back to what Yomi asked about the e-tax, it's been a bit difficult getting people to migrate onto the e-tax. The e-tax solution is a very good solution that very easy and simple to go by. But there is a little problem that a lot of people associate with migration to this platform. We need, or we request for them to put in their BVN. Now, we ask for the BVN for one simple reason. Nigeria has a big problem when it comes to identity management. We have a few identity management organizations like NIMSI and the work, but the BVN for us has been very, very reliable because it's primarily clean data. But unfortunately, a lot of residents associate putting in their BVN with some sort of espionage or some suspicion that putting the BVN is going to give us access directly to their bank statements. Well, there's nothing further from the truth. It's just a unique identifier for us because we need to have proper identification of all taxpayers. But putting that aside, I must say that the platform has worked very well so far. Probably Mr. Adeni is referencing what happened about 3 years ago, because 3 years ago was the first time that we decided to put filing online. So it did not use the e-tax solution. But we learned a lot of lessons at that time. A lot of Nigerians wait till the last minute before they file anything at all. So even if you give 6 months, 5 months, everybody is going to be in slumber, deep slumber. And then 2 weeks to the time, everybody wants to then file. So what happened 3 years ago was that the traffic that came onto the platform in the last 2 weeks overwhelmed the platform completely. So we had to quickly sit down, we had to increase our bandwidth, and then we created desks all over where people could go and file. Now I tell you one thing, there were hundreds and thousands of people who came to file, especially in the HQ, in our headquarters. It's the same online platform. There's no magic that we were performing inside our office, but they came and they successfully filed all their return. So half of the time, there's a lot of lack of knowledge in how to actually enter the platform and file. Then also, there are local problems, infrastructural problems, that might exist for those taxpayers. So maybe their internet is a bit slow, or the bandwidth is just too low, or whatever. So they encounter all sorts of problems, and then they say the platform is what has problem. But generally, I think the platform is working well. We've implemented the phase 1. We're presently working on a phase 2, which will add more modules to what we have already. So I must say it's working very well for us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zubair, for that very extensive information around the e-tax platform. I'm going to ask just a quick question on that before I let you go. We have just about 12 minutes left, and so I'm going to be going around for my panel member to take their closing shot in terms of the thought they want to leave us with from their respective perspective. But before I let you go, Mr. Zubair, on the point of e-tax platform. So you've mentioned what you're doing or provide some bit of comfort around the use of BVN, and it's not some bit of espionage. You've spoken about the user experience and the interface and how the LRS is trying to make improvements. I think one other point that I would want you to speak more explicit about is to assure taxpayer about confidentiality and privacy of their information. So with your BVN, beyond deliberate espionage, you also have information that could be inadvertently be out in the public. Biodata information, personal confidential information, earnings information, and all of that. How secure is the eTax platform? How much of penetration testing, intrusion testing, confirming the robustness of the platform, how much of that has the state done to assure taxpayer that should you put your detail there, it's only going to be accessible by the authorities and only on a need-to-know basis? So how will you assure the taxpaying residents?
Okay, yes, I will say that we have a responsibility to all taxpayers to ensure that all their data is secure and is kept in a very, very confidential manner. At the onset, when we launched the eTax, we spoke to a lot of top consulting firms, Deloitte. We spoke with Anderson. They were very involved at the initial stage. KPMG, they all even wrote rejoinders on social media, telling members of the public to beware of what they are keying into the systems. So I had to personally call up tax partners generally across the spectrum and try and assure them and assuage their feelings, let them know that we are a very responsible organization and such information that they key into the system is definitely secure. There are two things here. One is under general principles of taxation, confidentiality. For all professionals, confidentiality is very key. Now we also have an added responsibility coming from NITDA. Privacy of data is very, very key. So we have all sorts of measures within our organization. Access to the information, for example, is restricted. Not every member of staff of LRS will even be able to see your BVN that you have keyed in. It's going to be, it's usually encrypted, and we have a hierarchy of officers who can actually see everything that is in the system. BVN is one of the things that people do not have access to. So we're very, very conscious and we're very responsible about whatever information that.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that assurance. So it's time for closing shots. So I'll start from Mr. Rewaney and then let Odunayo take the second slot. Okay. All right. So Mr. Rewaney, so we want you back on the set. So I just want your closing shot on the whole subject of rational tax administration for sustainable revenue generation in the state. So what would be the parting shots you're going to leave with us, both to the revenue authorities, both to the taxpayers, and as we look forward to another decade of growth in Lagos State?
The revenue collecting authorities, we need to be very clear. If there's a lack of trust and you have things like the BVN and people are afraid of it, then maybe we can use the national identification number if there's no hidden agenda of any sort. And that as a substitute for identification, clean data. Secondly, the whole emphasis on publishing state accounts to see how the money has been used diligently will be important, because there's a lot of mistrust. And if that is handled, you'll find that the level of compliance will actually improve. So again, this is a worthwhile initiative. It's good at this time, and it's important that the Lagos State is at the forefront of this, and we look forward to working closely with you to ensure that people comply fully. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Thank you so much, Mr. Rewaney, for that insight. So, Odunayo, so what have you got to say? So your parting shots along the same line. Any specific ask or expectation or advice or way to go for both the tax administrators and also the Lagosian, particularly tax-paying public?
Okay. Okay, yeah. Well, I think that no one really wants to evade taxes. I think that what people want to see is here's how my taxes are being spent and here's how I can pay it easily. So there is a lot to be said for increasing and improving the automation and ease and seamlessness of paying these taxes, and also the engagement of stakeholders from the government to the public to the private sector in how like all of these processes are set so that there is a clear understanding and all of these gaps are closed. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Thank you so very much, Odonayo. So, for me, let me have your own perspective, both from policy, from administration, from a regulation perspective. What do we want to see in Lagos State to make for a progressive system for tax administration?
Okay, so I would like to mention that I think that the salary structure of the officials, of the government officials, should be reviewed. So you see the trend in, if there's, I mean, there should be sanctions on extra, I mean, if anyone is living above its means. So everyone is equal and no one is above the law. And I would also want things like the tax amenities aimed at expanding the tax net. You know, in the past we had the VADs, we had the VOAs. All of those actually brought people to the tax net, but there weren't sanctions for people that didn't actually comply. So government should be deliberate about things like this and not just come up with ideas and then go to sleep after the deadline. So, I mean, there should be a proper accountability of what government earned and how the expenses are being incurred. So all of this would help the trust, bridge the gap between taxpayers and government officials. And corruption actually is, I know they say corruption is actually eating deep into our system, but there's a way we can manage that and ensure that everybody is confident about the activities of government and of its agents. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Thank you for me. Mr. Denny, let me come to you. So your parting shots, please.
All right. Thank you very much for and this is for Mr. Asubero. I would like to request on behalf of the OPSN that just like you mentioned in your opening remark, that the tax laws are being reviewed or are set to be reviewed. What we didn't get from you is a commitment as to when that would happen going forward. Two is the fact that you also had discussed the issue of the penalties that are already, I mean, the penalties that we have now, the fact that, yes, they are low, and so because they are low, people just would accept that, yes, let the penalty come and we'll pay. How quickly is that going to be reviewed? Thirdly, we have also discussed the issue of task force. When will that be in place? We need some places where we can take tax out of the regular court for proper arbitration. So we need it to be in place so that we know where all of us can go and arbitrate. And finally, reconciliations. There is need to also put a time after a tax audit. What is the timeline for reconciliation? So that all of that is built into the system of our operation. We don't wait endlessly and then all of a sudden we have such issues to come to, I mean, to grapple with. And again, on the final note, is to say that communication is key. We want regular communication with the OPSN, the various platforms where you can meet with us, meet with our members, and educate all the more on the happenings as regards to Lagos State. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Denny. So, Mr. Zubar, I'll leave you the final slot to give your closing remark. And maybe if you can use a minute to just respond very quickly. One of the questions we had on the chat board is someone requesting to know whether Lagos State has a plan to start taxing cryptocurrency. So maybe you want to touch on that very briefly, but just your parting shot in terms of the direction of travel for tax administration in the state. What should taxpayers expect? Are there specific plans to further ease their burden, or what are we doing, and how do we move forward from here?
Thank you very much. At least I'm assured that there will not be any further questions from anybody after I have spoken. So, Mr. Rewane made a very, very solid point, which probably took that out of my mouth. He said that if we have issues with BVN, why don't we revert to using the NIN number? And this is actually one of the things that we have considered. The state government has invested a lot of resources in building up LASRA so that all residents in Lagos will be fully registered. And the unique identifier there is a NIN number. So once we integrate with the LASRA database, automatically the emphasis will shift to the NIN as opposed to the BVN. So that's in the works. So generally, my parting shot will be around us supporting the indefatigable and dynamic Governor, Mr. Sanwo-Olu, in ensuring that taxes are generally paid. In ensuring that these taxes are paid, we also have a responsibility of easing the compliance with the tax laws. Now, I'll just quickly remind us that the taxes that we administer are enacted through act of the National Assembly. So we really do not have a say in these taxes. So we cannot vary the taxes, we cannot reduce them or increase them. So that should be very clear to us. We recognize that automation is very, very key. It is the future of business. It is the future of all global economies. It certainly will be the future of LRS. So towards this automation, it brings with it transparency, accountability. I'm trying to touch a little bit on what everybody has said in terms of closing that gap. So yes, we realize that there's a knowledge gap, and we invest a lot of resources in educating and enlightening members of the public. We have a website that is very robust, that publishes everything that you might think of concerning tax administration. We also advertise what the government is doing. So in terms of accountability and development, all the developmental projects of the state are advertised. So at this point, I think I'll just stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. I think on this note, we will bring this conversation to a close. It's been a very engaging session, and I want to thank very specially all my panel members. Mr. Bismarck Rewane, thank you for joining us virtually. Ms. Odun-Eweni, thank you for joining us. We do appreciate your contribution. Fumi-Olani, always nice to have you on the panel. Thank you very much for your session. And Mr. Taiwo Adeniyi, we're grateful for your session, for your participation in the session. Mr. Subal, well, we are gathered here to queue behind you and behind the state and making sure that we're able to raise the revenue. And we really want to thank you, not just only for your participation on the panel, but as a member of the Lagos State Government Executive, we appreciate the insight that you have brought. And I also want to especially appreciate the Accountant General who sat in the audience. We really want to appreciate your presence. You were here with us for the conversation. Mr. Abiodun Murtala, thank you for being part of the session. So we will bring it to a close at this time. One of the beautiful things about Ehimbeti is that it's not just conversation, it's not just speeches. We've seen over the number of years that many of the recommendations, many of the panels have found themselves into implementation tracker, and all of the suggestions that have happened on this panel, it's my expectation that they will be collated in the same way, and we will dissect and see how to forward this to the Secretariat so that we can have those initiatives and those ideas. All right. Okay. So we can have those ideas and initiatives, implemented. I also want to especially thank the answer to the governor on economy and planning. So thank you so much for being here with us. We do appreciate your presence here in the room. So the conversation continues. We will bring it to a close here, but we obviously encourage you to continue to listen to the rest of the summit, and we will be here next year by God's grace to review how well we have done implementing many of the suggestions. Thank you so very much. It's bye-bye from me. See you some other time. Thank you very much.